Good evening, everybody. Thank you all so much for being here. What an amazing, wonderful crowd. We're so happy to see all of you. I'm Lissa Muscatine. I'm one of the owners of Politics and Prose, along with my husband, Brad Graham, who actually is at a book conference in Baltimore tonight, so he's not here. I think you were just there earlier today or at some point. Yep. But I'm here, so manning the fort, and very delighted to be here for this event. Just the way this will work is that Jeanine will speak and do some readings from her book, and then there will be time for questions at the end. She will also sign copies at the end. The way the signing line will work is it'll start here, and it will go that way. And at the end of the event, if you are sitting in a seat and would be happy enough to sort of fold up the chair and move it to the side, it will expedite the signing line, and it will really go over well with our exhausted, overworked, underpaid staff. So they will be especially appreciative. Anyway, I think that's the housekeeping. Oh, one other thing, if you have a cell phone on or noise-making device, we also would be grateful if you could silence it for the event. So happy to have all of you here tonight to hear Jeanine Cummins. She's going to be speaking about her new novel, American Dirt, which I think you can tell by the size of this crowd is one of the most anticipated books of the year. Seldom does a work of fiction get so much attention into the run-up to its publication. By the time American Dirt arrived in bookstores like this one just yesterday, it had been optioned for a movie, selected as an Indie Next selection by booksellers across the country, including many in this store, and generated 4 stories in the New York Times. If that wasn't enough, Oprah announced this week that she was selecting American Dirt as the next title for her book club. It's a heart-wrenching page-turner you won't put down, Oprah tweeted about the novel, which tells the story of a mother and son who flee a drug cartel in Mexico that has murdered their family, joining a forced migration of men, women, and children south of our border who seek refuge in the United States to escape violence in their own countries. It's a great book. If you haven't read it, it's so good. Just my, minor editorial aside here. Now, all of this attention may sound like an author's dream. In fact, while a star-studded roster of literary luminaries has heaped praise on the book, and you'll see on the back cover blurbs from Stephen King, Julia Alvarez, Sandra Cisneros, John Grisham, Ann Patchett, and others, Jeanine has found herself at the center of a controversy that in many ways much more mirrors the political and cultural tensions coursing through our country today than it is about one person and one book. Those questions that it has raised include, who is entitled to tell whose story? What is the purpose of literary fiction? Does a white-dominated publishing world perpetuate cultural bias in its choices of authors and books to promote? American Dirt has provoked so much debate that the culture blog Vulture ran a piece under the headline, "Why is everyone arguing about American Dirt?" Now, and this is kind of a measure of the insanity that we have arrived at, book critics are even critiquing critiques of the book. I am not kidding. But for purposes of tonight's conversation and for people who want to actually read the book and make a judgment for themselves, here's what I think you should think about ahead of time. Jeanine has long focused her fiction on explorations of human trauma, with some of her earlier works inspired by experiences very close to her own family. This time she wanted to write a book with strong women characters. She definitely succeeded in that. She wanted to convey the lengths to which a mother will go to protect her child. She also wanted to bring to life, as best she could through her own research and her literary imagination, the experience of displacement and hardship at the center of today's immigration debate. As she herself has said in her author's note and in interviews, her voice is not the first, nor the last, nor the most accurate, nor the most definitive on this subject. There will surely be more, and she welcomes all of them. Jeanine is here tonight to talk about her book and read passages from it. She will be happy to answer all of your questions afterwards. As always here at P&P, our only requirement is that we all remain respectful and generous as we listen to and hear from one another, even when we disagree. Please join me in welcoming Jeanine Cummins to Politics and Prose.
Hi, guys. Hi. Can you guys hear me? Oh, I guess I can't cancel then. Thank you all for coming out. It's so nice to see so many friendly faces. Some of you may not know that I grew up in Gaithersburg, Maryland, and the mayor of my hometown is here. They just selected the book for their inaugural Gaithersburg Citywide Reads program, so that's very exciting. My mom is also here. Hi, Mom. And my second mom sitting right next to her. I have a lot of family and friends here tonight, and I'm really grateful that you all took time out of your day to come and support me. I'm gonna tell you a story about this embarrassing, enormous corsage that I'm wearing. My dad died while I was writing this book, and he was my biggest fan. And he used to bring a corsage to every event that I did. And even when they were like really big, and I'd be like, I wore them proudly every time. And he also used to bring a sound system in the trunk of his car just in case. And one time we actually had to use it. He was like, I'll just run out. The mic wasn't, he's like, I have a PA system. And the bookseller was like, how is this possible? And he saved the day. So I got to the restaurant this evening, and my sister, who I can't see, my sister, handed me a box with this in it and a note that said, I couldn't be prouder of you. Signed, my dad. Yay, Kathy. And of course I cried, and she was like, oh, I didn't mean for that to happen. But it's really wonderful to feel like there's so much support. This book has been some experience in my life. When I set out to write this book, I presumed it would be received the way all of my books have been received, which was to say that people would like it, sort of, and that it would be published, and I would be paid some measly sum of money for that publication, and then I would move on and write the next one. I never anticipated this kind of reception for the book, and it has been an absolute dream in so many ways. The love that I feel for this book, the support that I've gotten from writers who are my lifelong heroes, from Oprah Winfrey, just from so many people whose opinions mean the world to me, has been really a dream come true. I did not foresee all of the other stuff, and I should have, because for a long time I was afraid of it. I lived with the fear of writing this book. I started writing it in 2013. I did 5 years of research. I went to the border. I went to Mexico. I traveled throughout the borderlands. I visited Casas de Migrante in Mexico. I visited orphanages. I volunteered at a desayunador, which is like a soup kitchen for migrants. I met with the people who have devoted their lives on the front line to the work of protecting vulnerable people. I met so many courageous men and women who were making their journeys to try to get to this country, and who had been recently deported from this country, very often away from their children who are United States citizens. And every person I met in that experience of my research made me feel more and more determined to tell this story. Not because there weren't already a great many stories turning around this topic, being told by beautiful and impressive voices, but because I felt I had something of value to contribute to the conversation, and because I feel, frankly, that these are stories that we should all be engaged in. When I went to the borderlands, and when I spent time in Mexico, and when I interacted with the people whose lives were most deeply affected by the crisis at the border, I saw what real courage looks like. And it made me sort of recognize the cowardice of being afraid to write a book. And still I resisted for a long time. I wrote 2 failed drafts of this novel, trying to force a round peg into a square hole. And then my dad died. a week before the 2016 presidential election. And he died very suddenly. He was out to dinner with my mom and Mrs. Young and some other friends. And he just died at the table. And that grief incapacitated me in a way that was all new. And I have had serious trauma in my life before. And I thought I knew what grief looked like. And I couldn't get out of bed for about 4 months. Sorry. And when I began to emerge from the deepest part of that grief, I had a very painful new perspective on what really mattered to me and what didn't matter to me. And I felt compelled to write this book. And for better or for worse, here it is. I got it. Thank you. That's my nephew, Eamon, who I suspect, because he is his grandfather's grandson, was getting ready to whip out a handkerchief for me. And I'm right. He has Kleenex in his hand. At the end of the day, you know, one of the earliest people who I spoke to when I started my research for this book was an incredibly generous scholar of Chicano studies in San Diego State University named Norma Iglesias Prieto. And when I expressed my reservations and my concerns to her, she said to me, "Jeanine, we need every voice we can get telling this story." And that was the voice I heard in my head every time I faltered or worried about how I was going to write this book. And I've been incredibly gratified by the response to it. And that's really what I'm trying to focus on, is the fact that despite the fact that it has grown into this crazy moment that I never anticipated and that feels as if I'm in the eye of the hurricane, I know for a fact that this book is moving people. I know because I've heard from so many readers who have come to me, and there was a woman today at Winter Institute in Baltimore who came up to me afterwards, and with tears in her eyes, she said to me, "I am the person who needed to read this book." She said, "I am not empathetic by nature. I don't care about migrants, and now I care about migrants." So I'm not expecting or anticipating in any way that will be the universal response. But if that response exists, then I feel good about the job that I've done in writing this book. So, without further ado, I will stop talking and start reading. I'm just going to read, I'm going to read the opening chapter, I think. Okay. One of the very first bullets comes in through the open window above the toilet where Luca is standing. He doesn't immediately understand that it's a bullet at all, and it's only luck that it doesn't strike him between the eyes. Luca hardly registers the mild noise it makes as it flies past and lodges into the tiled wall behind him. But the wash of bullets that follows is loud, booming and thudding, clack-clacking with helicopter speed. There is a raft of screams, too, but that noise is short-lived, soon exterminated by the gunfire. Before Luca can zip his pants, lower the lid, climb up to look out, before he has time to verify the source of that terrible clamor, the bathroom door swings open, and Mommy is there. "Mijo, ven," she says, so quietly that Luca doesn't hear her. Her hands are not gentle. She propels him toward the shower. He trips on the raised tile step and falls forward onto his hands. Mommy lands on top of him, and his teeth pierce his lip in the tumble. He tastes blood. One dark droplet makes a tiny circle of red against the bright green shower tile. Mommy shoves Luca into the corner. There's no door on this shower, no curtain. It's only a corner of his abuela's bathroom, with a third tiled wall built to suggest a stall. This wall is around 5.5 feet high and 3 feet long, just large enough with some luck to shield Luca and his mother from sight. Luca's back is wedged, his small shoulders touching both walls. His knees are drawn up to his chin, and Mommy is clinched around him like a tortoise's shell. The door of the bathroom remains open, which worries Luca, though he can't see it beyond the shield of his mother's body, behind the half barricade of his abuela's shower wall. He'd like to wriggle out and tip that door lightly with his finger. He'd like to swing it shut. He doesn't know that his mother left it open on purpose, that a closed door only invites closer scrutiny. The clatter of gunfire outside continues, joined by an odor of charcoal and burning meat. Papi is grilling carne asada out there, and Luca's favorite chicken drumsticks. He likes them only a tiny bit blackened, the crispy tang of the skins. His mother pulls her head up long enough to look him in the eye. She puts her hands on both sides of his face and tries to cover his ears. Outside, the gunfire slows. It ceases and then returns in short bursts, mirroring, Luca thinks, the sporadic and wild rhythm of his heart. In between the racket, Luca can still hear the radio, a woman's voice announcing La Mejor 100.1 FM Acapulco, followed by Banda MS singing about how happy they are to be in love. Someone shoots the radio, and then there's laughter, men's voices, 2 or 3, Luca can't tell. Hard boot steps on Abuela's patio. Is he here? One of the voices is just outside the window. Here. What about the kid? Mira, there's a boy here. This him? Luca's cousin, Adrian. He's wearing cleats and his Hernandez jersey. Adrian can juggle a ballon de football on his knees 47 times without dropping it. I don't know, looks the right age. Take a picture. Hey, chicken, another voice says. Man, this looks good. You want some chicken? Luca's head is beneath his mommy's chin, her body knotted tightly around him. Forget the chicken, pendejo. Check the house. Luca's mommy rocks in her squatting position, pushing Luca even harder into the tiled wall. She squeezes against him, and together they hear the squeak and bang of the back door. Footsteps in the kitchen. The intermittent rattle of bullets in the house. Mommy turns her head and notices, vivid against the tile floor, the lone spot of Luca's blood, illuminated by the slant of light from the window. Luca feels her breath snag in her chest. The house is quiet now. The hallway that ends at the door of this bathroom is carpeted. Mommy tugs her shirt sleeve over her hand, and Luca watches in horror as she leans away from him toward that telltale splatter of blood. She runs her sleeve over it, leaving behind only a faint smear, and then pitches back to him just as the man in the hallway uses the butt of his AK-47 to nudge the door the rest of the way open. There must be 3 of them, because Luca can still hear 2 voices in the yard. On the other side of the shower wall, the third man unzips his pants and empties his bladder into Abuela's toilet. Luca does not breathe. Mommy does not breathe. Their eyes are closed, their bodies motionless. Even their adrenaline is suspended within the calcified will of their stillness. The man hiccups, flushes, washes his hands. He dries them on Abuela's good yellow towel, the one she only puts out for parties. They don't move after the man leaves, even after they hear the squeak and bang once more of the kitchen door. They stay there, fixed in their tight knot of arms and legs and knees and chins and clenched eyelids and locked fingers, even after they hear the man join his compatriots outside, after they hear him announce that the house is clear and he's going to eat some chicken now, because there's no excuse for letting good barbecue go to waste, not when there are children starving in Africa. The man is still close enough outside the window that Luca can hear the moist, rubbery smacking sounds his mouth makes with the chicken. Luca concentrates on breathing, in and out, without sound. He tells himself that this is just a bad dream, a terrible dream, but one he's had many times before. He always awakens, heart pounding, and finds himself flooded with relief. It was just a dream. Because these are the modern bogeymen of urban Mexico. Because even parents who take care not to discuss the violence in front of them, to change the radio station when there's news of another shooting, to conceal the worst of their own fears, cannot prevent their children from talking to other children. On the swings, at the football field, in the boys' bathroom at school, the gruesome stories gather and swell. These kids, rich, poor, middle class, have all seen bodies in the streets. Casual murder. And they know from talking to one another that there's a hierarchy of danger, that some families are at greater risk than others. So although Luca never saw the least scrap of evidence of that risk from his parents, even though they demonstrated their courage impeccably before their son, he knew. He knew this day would come. But that truth does nothing to soften its arrival. It's a long, long while before Luca's mother removes the clamp of her hand from the back of his neck, before she leans back far enough from him for him to notice that the angle of light falling through the bathroom window has changed. There's a blessing in the moments after terror and before confirmation. When at last he moves his body, Luca experiences a brief lurching exhilaration at the very fact of his being alive. For a moment, he enjoys the ragged passage of breath through his chest. He places his palms flat to feel the cool press of tiles beneath his skin. Mommy collapses against the wall across from him and works her jaw in a way that reveals the dimple in her left cheek. It's weird to see her good church shoes in the shower. Luca touches the cut on his lip. The blood has dried there, but he scratches it with his teeth and it opens again. He understands that, were this a dream, he would not taste blood. At length, Mommy stands. Stay here, she instructs him in a whisper. Don't move until I come back for you. Don't make a sound, you understand? Luca lunges for her hand. Mommy, don't go. Mijo, I will be right back, okay? You stay here. Mommy pries Luca's fingers from her hand. Don't move, she says again. Good boy. Luca finds it easy to obey his mother's directive, not so much because he's an obedient child, but because he doesn't want to see. His whole family out there, in Abuela's backyard. Today is Saturday, April 7th, his cousin Jennifer's quinceañera, her 15th birthday party. She's wearing a long white dress. Her father and mother are there, Tio Alex and Tia Yemi, and Jennifer's younger brother, Adrian, who, because he already turned 9, likes to say he's a year older than Luca, even though they're really only 4 months apart. Before Luca had to pee, he and Adrian had been kicking the balón around with their other primos. The mothers had been sitting around the table at the patio, their ice palomas sweating on their napkins. The last time they were all together at Abuela's house, Jennifer had accidentally walked in on Luca in the bathroom, and Luca was so mortified that today he made Mommy come with him and stand guard outside the door. Abuela didn't like it. She told Mommy she was coddling him, that a boy his age should be able to go to the bathroom by himself. But Luca is an only child, so he gets away with things other kids don't. In any case, Luca is alone in the bathroom now, and he tries not to think it, but the thought swarms up unbidden. Those irritable words Mommy and Abuela exchanged were perhaps the very last ones between them, ever. Luca had approached the table wriggling, whispered into Mommy's ear, and Abuela, seeing this, had shaken her head, wagged an admonishing finger at them both, past her remarks. She had a way of smiling when she criticized. But Mommy was always on Luca's side. She rolled her eyes and pushed her chair back from the table anyway, ignoring her mother's disapproval. When was that? 10 minutes ago? 2 hours? Luca feels unmoored from the boundaries of time that have always existed. Outside the window, he hears Mommy's tentative footsteps, the soft scuff of her shoe through the remnants of something broken. A solitary gasp, too windy to be called a sob. Then a quickening of sound as she crosses the patio with purpose, depresses the keys on her phone. When she speaks, her voice has a stretched quality that Luca has never heard before, high and tight in the back of her throat. Send help. Thank you for listening. My dad would say, thank you for not throwing tomatoes. I think I'm ready for questions. I think I just want to say that I hope people will read the book before deciding whether or not how they feel about the book. Yeah.
If you have a question, then can come to this microphone over here. I don't think we have one set up here right now. Yeah, if you could just come to this microphone. We are filming the event tonight, and we like to capture the questions. So, feel free to make your way to the mic if you would like to ask a question.
And if you don't want to ask questions, we can just move this show right along to the signing portion. My mom wants to ask a question. It was her phone, by the way, that made the noise. Well.
I just thought people might be interested in the fact we were a Navy family.
Oh, God.
She was born in Spain along with her sister. And so her Spanish was her first language. And I can tell from her she's got it nailed with the Spanish accent. But
That's
when
enough,
we
Mom.
first
Thank you.
came back- when we first
Mrs.
came
Young,
back
please take
from
the mic
s-
from her.
When we first came back to the States, we called her for lunch at her grandmother's, and she had no idea what we were saying because we were saying it in English. And about the third time, her grandmother, who was from Puerto Rico, said, "Niña, aquí, por favor, siéntese en las sillas, tiempo para comer." So she comes over and sits down and starts eating, and I said to my husband, "We got a problem."
I did not have a problem with that. I don't usually blush, but I can feel the heat creeping up my face. So thank you for taking that microphone away from her. Thank you, Mom. I survived that, so.
I'll ask a question while the rest of you are organizing your questions, because I know that you're not that shy of an audience. But one of the things that I think is so compelling about this book, I mean, most of the attention around it has centered on the immigration story, which obviously is extremely important and full of all sorts of passion and emotion in the way that you tell it. But as I said in the introduction, you also have been motivated to write about trauma, and you mentioned that yourself. And I'm just wondering, that's hard, I imagine. And can you just tell us a little bit about the trajectory of your own writing career through that lens? How have you arrived at the different things you've written about, and why?
Yeah. So my first book was a memoir called A Rip in Heaven that was published in 2004. It is the story of a thing that happened to my family when I was 16 years old. My brother Tom, who's here tonight, was out. We were out in St. Louis, where my grandparents were from. My mom grew up in St. Louis. We were out visiting family, and my brother and my two cousins, they were sisters, Julie and Robin Carey, were attacked by 4 men on the Chain of Rocks Bridge, and the girls were gang raped and thrown into the Mississippi River. And Tom was held and beaten and also forced into the Mississippi River, and he was the only surviving victim of the crime. In my early 20s, my brother, who's a firefighter, came to me and said, my therapist thinks I should write a book. And I was like, well, good for your therapist. I was like, more power to her. You guys should do that. Rock on. And he was like, I need your help. And, you know, initially I didn't want to do it. We have a very big family. Everyone has different memories of the event. It was a horrific trauma for all of us. I didn't want to pretend that I could become the voice of the family. But after protracted discussions with my brother, he convinced me of 3 things. The first was that I could provide him a voice that he deserved and was unable to muster for himself. The second was that I could write a love letter to my cousins who died, and that was a worthwhile endeavor. And the third, and this is where I can draw a bright line to American Dirt, is that I really wanted to take the stories away from the violent men who were at their center and give them to the people who suffered and endured that violence on the flip side. The 4 men who did this crime, were all convicted, and 3 of them were sent to death row. And because they were on death row, they were given a platform to tell their side of the story. And that story got a lot of attention. And over the years, we just watched helplessly while Julie and Robin were demoted to like footnotes in their own murders. And in so many ways, I feel like that's what's happening to the conversation about immigration in this country. There are these sort of incredibly superficial dueling narratives where from the right, we talk about immigrants as this invading mob of criminals, and from the left, it's this incredibly paternalistic, maddening, oh, these poor people, we must save them. And there's this huge gap in the middle where their humanity should be. And, you know, where we are engaged in telling these stories, I feel like a lot of us are relatively complacent. We care about it, but not in an intimate way. And I just felt like there is a lot of room for more stories like this that center the experiences of women and children, that center the experiences of vulnerable people, that center the experiences of trauma, and just sort of remind the reader this is who actually matters in this story. It's not those violent men. It's not the politicians. It's not what we are pretending it is in this country. And we should wake up and pay attention. And yeah, that's kind of, Jesus, I need to take a breath. That is the bright line between my books. And I think it's a bright line that exists in all of my books to a lesser degree. But to be sure, I do feel like this is a story that had an awful lot to do with my own life experiences, with my own trauma, with my own grief. The fact that my dad died when I was 3 years deep into the research, it means that the grief that these characters are experiencing on the page was my grief in real time as I was writing it. Yeah, that's. I think I'm trailing off because I don't know how to wrap this up, but I'm just trying to keep breathing. Any other questions? Oh, good, my brother now. It's gonna be a real friendly night.
Judd's got one. The mayor has one.
And I apologize because it's kind of more of a comment. I have read the book. I do, for anybody here who hasn't made the decision yet to go buy it, you should buy it. It's entirely a page turner. I think it's an important book. I think it's as Lissa said, and Jeanine, it's entirely relevant to the conversation today. And we made the decision back in August, we got an early copy of this book, that we were going to build a community-wide read, as you alluded to earlier. That's what we're going to do this in Gaithersburg. And I guess we had all the praise and we had the early reviews, and we didn't see some of the backlash coming. But I have to say, your community, on behalf of your community, we are so proud of you. We are so proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
These are brave stances that you're taking. They're important. You're championing people who need to be championed. And we're very proud, and we're looking forward to another wonderful event with you on March 31st, just so you guys know.
And by the way,
Thank you.
he's being very modest. He is the brainchild of the Gaithersburg Book Festival, which
Yep.
I hope many of you have been to, that we have partnered with you
great
guys now
event.
for, 6 or 7 years.
I
And-
also, as long as we're on the subject of Gaithersburg, who here's from Gaithersburg? How many so it's a lot of people, okay. I really do love Gaithersburg. And I say to people, whenever I'm out in the world, now and again, I will meet someone from Gaithersburg or from Montgomery County. And it's always this really bizarre moment of like when you meet, you're like, oh, you're Montgomery County? Oh, good, you're not racist. It's like, whew! It's like it's an immediate, I grew up, we didn't move to Gaithersburg until I was, I don't know how old I was, but I moved around a lot in my early years. And then, I went all through elementary school in Gaithersburg and high school. But I had the experience of growing up in a community that was not only diverse, but integrated. And I thought that was normal. And our street was completely integrated. Like it was, you guys know, it was, we had Korean families, Jewish families, Puerto Rican families, mixed race families, African American families, all living on the same block. We all played together. We went to proms together. We were on the same sports teams. And I thought, racism is dead. It's awesome being out in the world. And then I went to Baltimore for college. And I was like, oh, whoops. I feel like I grew up in this bubble of sort of utopian racial harmony that I quickly came to realize as a young adult was very rare. And I didn't understand how deeply that informed the person I became until I left there. And I'm grateful to Gaithersburg for having that effect on me and on my mind and my brain as a young person. So congratulations to all my fellow Gaithersburgers for being awesome.
Hi there. Thanks for being here. I have a writerly question.
Okay.
So those first 2 failed drafts you did,
Yeah.
did they start the same way?
No, they did not. In fact, the first 2 failed drafts were so different. There is almost no overlap at all. There is only one point of overlap, and that is Luca. I was trying to write from a round robin point of view because I was resisting writing from a migrant's point of view for a long time. For years. So I was writing a whole bunch of different characters who I felt like were safe, and they weren't working. They just weren't working, and they weren't interesting, and they were frankly an inappropriate lens through which to try to examine this story. And I knew that, but it was also thanks to my good friend Carolyn Turgeon, who's standing in the back, who's a writer, and a few of my other writer friends who read the early drafts and very kindly were like, this is garbage. But they all invariably told me the same thing, which was Luca is the only one I care about. And all of these other people on the page are nonsense. And I sort of resent them for taking me away from Luca. And I just want to know about Luca. And I want to know that he's okay. And I want to know how he got to where he is. And I want Luca. And eventually I listened. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Hi there. Thanks so much for the reading.
Hi.
I was wondering, now looking back on the controversy that this has ginned up and having had some time to chew it over, if you could go back and do this all over from the beginning, is there anything that you would do differently about informing your process, gathering the anecdotes that, sort of worked your, through the creative process that you worked through? I mean, is there anything that you would do differently, having seen the way that people...
Well, I'll be
reacted
honest
to the
with you.
book?
I haven't seen it because I found out very, very early on that it was bad for my mental space, and it was incredibly painful. And I haven't looked at it. I know that it exists, and just knowing that it exists is painful. So I don't know the specifics for that to inform how I feel about the book. The fact is that I did the work. I did 5 years of research. And there was a lot of reading and sort of academic research in that process, but there was also a lot of on-the-ground research that involved going to Mexico and meeting migrants and observing the real conditions on the ground that they were facing, that they were living with, talking to many, many, many people, both migrants and non-migrants who are involved in the work of helping migrants and protecting them and offering them refuge. I spoke with pro bono legal aid workers who are representing asylum seekers, and I talked to people who are documenting human rights abuses on the border. I met one incredible woman, Laura Hunter, who is like in her 70s, this glamorous woman with like a flowing mane of silver hair who drives out in an SUV deep into the desert every weekend with maps of the most recent fatalities in the desert. And she goes to those places to leave water in those places in the hopes that no one will die in those places again. I met everyone I could think of meeting. I talked to everyone I could think of talking to. I did everything I could to inform myself before I tried to write this book. I am sure that in years to come, I will look back and see that there were things that I got wrong and perhaps things that I wished I had done differently. But right now, I don't know what those things are. I feel good about the process that led me to this moment.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Oh, here you go.
Oh, go ahead. She's over here.
Oh, yeah.
I was curious, does Luca have many faces, or does he conjure up one face in your memory?
I love that question. I had the great good fortune. Luca is 8 years old in the book. I had the great good fortune of living with my 2 children while I was writing Luca. My older daughter was about Luca's age when I started writing the book, and my younger daughter was about Luca's age when I finished writing the book. And to be sure, having their little voices, their precocious, sophisticated, innocent voices in my home all day, every day, helped inform how I wrote him. He's also, in some very specific ways, based on my nephew, Eamon, who probably doesn't know that until right now. And he's like, which ways are those? But the thing about Luca and the thing about this book, it is like a giant magnifying glass of sort of psychological self-reflection. And I don't think I understood this fully until the book was finished, but the whole structure of the book is like a conversation about parental love between Luca and Lydia. And I was grieving when I wrote it. I was grieving for my dad. And I was learning how to fill the void. When your father dies and your dad is a guy who, I want to tell you, every time I wrote a new book, a new mediocre book, he would be like, "What is that I hear? It's the sound of no bells," because he thought I would win a Nobel Prize. When I say he was my biggest fan, I mean genuinely, he thought I could win a Nobel Prize one day, which is insane. But that's how much he loved me. And when that void came into the world so suddenly, it felt as though a lot of the sort of Jeanine directed love in the world had just gone. And I think that so often that is what grief is this, it's grief for the person that you've lost, but it's also grief for how they loved you. And the knowing that love is gone now. And I think when we begin to heal is when we can still feel that love, and we can funnel it through ourselves and give it back to the people that we love the most. And, you know, I was in that process of like finding my dad-centered love and putting it onto my kids and learning how to repurpose it for my children. As I wrote about Luca and Lydia and their experiences of what Lydia was willing to do for that child, which is anything. She would do anything for him. I don't even remember what you asked me. Oh, yes, Luca. Luca. Yes. So Luca has many faces. You know, I see him as my child. I hope that readers will see him as their child, you know?
Hi. For those of us, I have not had a chance yet to read the book, but for those of us who feel similarly to the woman you said that you ran into at your event, who do have sort of reinvigorated empathy for migrants after reading your book, what ways, tangible ways, would you recommend that they support the migrant community?
I love that question. You can start by going to my website, where there is a Note from Jeanine tab with a good listing of a lot of the organizations that I met with and people who I interviewed, some of the orphanages and casas de migrante that I visited when I was doing my research. They need money. They need funds. And I think a lot of times we feel in this country like it's easy to give money. It's you want to do something more tangible, and that's a great way to feel as well. But like, money's easy. You can go on and it matters. You know, these are shoestring operations a lot of the time. And, that money goes a long way for little organizations who are out there on the front lines, or like really doing the work of just sort of quietly saving lives every single day. And I met some incredibly heroic people who are engaged in that work and could use your support for sure. But there are also like tremendous organizations in every community. If you want to do volunteer work one-on-one, I'm sure Politics and Prose probably knows of some of these organizations locally based who just need support and need help for migrants. And then the other thing is like, this sounds so lame, but like, let's just start being human to each other. I don't know. I think, thank you. I think just sort of remembering that when you see a person in your community, to not sort of think you know what their story is without asking them. Like, it's okay to ask people, like, what is your story? Why did you come here? Where are you from? How do you find it in this country? Are people welcoming to you? What can I do to help aid your transition? Just to be neighbors to each other, to be kind, and stop with the stereotyping and prejudging, and just be open, I think that's the number one thing, Thank you. Thank you for that question. This has been really easy so far. I'm terrified now that the other shoe is going to drop. Oh, it's not going to be this guy. I grew up across the street from him.
I don't have a question for you. I just have praise for you. I want to thank you for putting your thoughts and voice into everything you do. And thank you for this book. If it's as good as the other books that you've written, I can't wait to read it.
Thank you, Mr. Cormier. Thank you.
Sure. I just have a very frivolous question.
I love frivolous questions.
What's Oprah Winfrey like?
Oh my gosh, my hero. She's amazing. She held my hand for like an hour yesterday, and it was she's the most comforting human. And then, you guys, she called me today. And now I have her cell phone number. So, which is just, I know, we should. I don't want to abuse it just yet. I want her to not regret giving it to me for like at least a week. But it's what's really funny is that like 5 people today have said to me, "What does she smell like?" I'm like, she smells like rainbows. Like she's made of magic. She's just a wonderful human being. She's an incredible advocate for literacy and for books. She is a woman who has the courage of her convictions. She has been through the ringer over and over and over again, and she knows who she is, and she stands up for what she believes in, and I have a great deal of admiration for her. And actually, in my interactions with her so far, she is exactly what you see on TV. She is just that kind and compassionate and lovely person. Yeah, she's amazing.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi, Lee.
How are you?
I'm okay. I'm hanging in there.
All right. So I'm very curious. Because right now it's very relevant about this south of the border, immigrants from south of the border. But we also have, this country has a wide range of immigrants. And I was just thinking what just kind of gave you the light, the inspiration to write on this group of immigrants that is relevant at this time?
I don't know.
Because they've got the Asian immigrants, you've got the
I
Middle
know.
East immigrants.
I know. And I'm married to an immigrant who was undocumented for 10 years from Ireland. And that, I never ever want to conflate his experiences of like rolling up into JFK and standing at baggage carousel 3 and waiting to get his passport stamped with what is happening to people who are migrants and who are risking life and limb to get here. But, I do feel like I've always been interested in the topic of immigration. And when I began to sort of dig into immigration studies, immigration issues, immigration stories in 2013, so 7 years ago now, way before this was in the sort of national zeitgeist the way it is now, way before talk of building a wall or the current administration, I just felt like the most compelling and most misunderstood stories were the ones happening at our southern border, and I felt like these are stories that we should all be engaged in. So, look, my Irish husband doesn't need, he's a member of the most beloved immigrant group, arguably, that exists. Like, as soon as he opens his mouth and starts speaking, people are like, let me tell you about my grandfather from Cork, And although being an undocumented family was an objectively terrifying way to live, he had every privilege afforded to him within the danger of that situation, the vulnerability of that situation. I recognize that. And I don't know what the answer is. I was interested in this topic for a very long time. And I think maybe we should sit down with my therapist to find out why.
We have time for one more question.
Oh. Now there's pressure.
Now, it better be a good one.
Well, I know that you haven't read, although you say you've heard about everything that's going on the internet. But one of the comments that I read was what is happening to the novel these days.
Right.
If there is going to be this kind of uproar about a novel.
Right.
And I wondered, because your first book was nonfiction, what moved you from the nonfiction genre into a novel, and whether you ever thought about writing this story as a nonfiction story?
Okay, so I like that question. I think the writing of the memoir was so incredibly painful that I knew immediately upon publication that I never wanted to write nonfiction again.
Okay.
But equally, I understood that the engine for me as a writer, the thing I care about, is like that piece, that vulnerability, that, telling the story of the survivor or the victim. Look, the fact of the matter is that this conversation that's happening out there, mostly on the internet, is a really important conversation. It's been simmering for a very long time, and it's been ignored for a very long time. So that now the people who are really, I think, most invested in that conversation are just straight up angry. They're like, enough of this nonsense. And I get it, because voices of color and women's voices have been hijacked for a very long time. And I understand where that frustration is born. I have been the beneficiary both of white privilege, and I have been the beneficiary of a shift toward opening more doors for women's voices and voices of color. I'm a writer. I endeavored to write a novel that I hoped would move people. I endeavored to write a novel that would build a bridge. There is a lot of work to be done in the publishing industry on this front. I hope to contribute what I can to that conversation in a constructive way. But I don't feel like I'm responsible for the problem that exists. I believe in fiction. I believe in the magic of stories to build bridges of empathy and love into people's hearts, people who need those bridges. And no one needs those bridges right now more than the people who are compelled to leave their home places and strike out into tremendous personal peril with their children who might be taken away from them at our southern border because they are in danger, because they are vulnerable. I believe in the power of books to reach people's hearts. And that's what I was trying to do with this story.
And we thank you, because that's why we're here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And just to echo your last comment and your appreciation of it, I think everyone's appreciation of it. I can't tell you the number of authors who come through here. We do about 1,000 events a year in all different venues. How many of them say that as children or going through difficult circumstances in their lives as children, they found sanctuary in literature? And almost always it was literature presented by somebody different from them, whoever they were, whoever the author happened to be. And it's always a broad spectrum. And there's an enormous spectrum of people who have read this book, from Oprah to Sandra Cisneros to many others that we named. And I'm sure many in this audience, and certainly among our booksellers, who also thank you and appreciate what you tried to do, and mostly what you succeeded to do, to bring a story into the light that needs to be have a spotlight on it, in the most compassionate and humane way you knew how to do. And I think you're courageous to write any book, and especially this one. We really thank you for being here tonight with us.
Thank you.
If you would mind folding up your chairs and putting them aside, Jeanine will be happy to sign books. Thank you all for coming out tonight.